A Valentine's date from hell. Online dating was supposed to be a fresh start for me. After months of swiping through dead-end conversations, I finally matched with a guy named Daniel. His profile was normal enough, loved hiking, had a dog, seemed well-spoken. We talked for a couple of weeks, and he was charming in texts. Maybe a little too eager at times, but I brushed it off as excitement. We planned to meet on Valentine's Day at a cozy little Italian restaurant downtown. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked just like his pictures, tall, clean-cut, but something about him felt off. His smile didn't reach his eyes. As soon as I sat down, he started talking. Not just small talk, deep, intense things. How he thought we were meant to be, how he had never felt a connection like this. 20 minutes in, he called me his soulmate. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. The whole dinner was a nightmare. He kept leaning in too close, touching my hand too much, asking bizarre questions like, "How do you feel about moving in together soon?" I knew I needed to get out of there. I lied and said I wasn't feeling well, paid my half of the bill, and practically ran to my car. That should have been the end of it. But Daniel wasn't done with me. The texts started that night, paragraphs about how he knew I was scared of our connection. But he would wait. Then came the calls. When I blocked him, he made new numbers. Then the messages got darker. "You can't ignore fate. I know where you work. See you soon, beautiful." I was terrified. He started showing up at my job, standing outside my house. I'd see his car parked down the street at odd hours. One night, I woke up to the sound of my doorknob rattling. I barely had time to grab a knife before I heard him whispering my name through the mail slot. I called the police. They took a report, but he hadn't done anything yet. So I got a restraining order. That only made things worse. He left cryptic notes on my windshield, sent flowers to my office with messages like, "Resisting destiny is pointless." But then, things started happening inside my house. At first, it was small. A coffee mug missing from the cabinet, a picture frame that I swore was on my nightstand now lying on the floor, a scarf I always kept in my closet suddenly draped over my couch. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was so stressed I was forgetting where I put things. Until I found the note. It was tucked under my pillow. Just 3 words, written in neat, almost obsessive handwriting. "Sweet dreams, love." I barely slept that night. Every creak of my old apartment building made my stomach churn. I pushed a chair against the front door, checked every lock 3 times, and lay awake with a knife under my pillow. Then came the night at work. I had stayed late to finish up some reports, and by the time I left, the office parking lot was nearly empty. As I walked to my car, I had this feeling. You know that gut instinct that tells you something is wrong? The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced at my car window and saw it, his reflection lurking just behind a parked car. I turned, heart pounding, but he was already moving toward me. I bolted back inside, locking the door behind me. A coworker, Eric, was still in the building, and I told him what was happening. He walked me to my car, looking around for Daniel, but he was gone. When I finally sat in the driver's seat, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A note tucked under my windshield wiper. I was so close this time. I quit my job 2 weeks later. But the final straw? The one thing that made me pack up my life and run? The window. I had been so careful, checking the locks every night, never leaving anything open. But one night I walked into my bedroom and stopped dead in my tracks. My bedroom window, which I never left open, was cracked just slightly. A cold February breeze blew in, making my curtains sway. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, heart hammering. Then I saw them. Handprints, smudged against the glass. I couldn't stay. I packed my bags that night. Within a week, I quit my job, changed my number, and moved across the country. I didn't tell anyone except my closest family where I was going. I deleted all my social media, wiped any trace of where I might have gone. For a while, I thought I was free. I started to relax, let my guard down, until the email. It came from an anonymous address. No subject line, no message, just 3 words. Found you yet? Valentine's Day is supposed to be about love, but for me it's the day I learned that some people don't take no for an answer. And sometimes, swiping right can ruin your life. Story number 2, Love Me Forever. Valentine's Day has always been overrated. Expensive dinners, forced romance, and cheesy gifts. I never cared much for it, until I met Ethan. We met at a bookstore a month before Valentine's. I was reaching for a horror novel when he grabbed it at the same time. We laughed, made small talk, and before I knew it, we were grabbing coffee. He was charming, thoughtful, and just the right amount of mysterious. By our 3rd date, I was smitten, so when he invited me to his cabin in the woods for a private Valentine's getaway, I didn't hesitate. It was a little last minute, but he swore it would be special. A weekend just for us. The drive was long. Too long. The further we got, the more uneasy I felt. The roads became narrower, winding through dense trees. My phone lost service miles ago, but Ethan reassured me, squeezing my hand. We'll be completely alone, he said with a soft smile. That was the first red flag. When we finally arrived, the cabin was unsettling. It was beautiful, sure, but it felt off. The windows were covered in thick curtains, and the only light came from flickering candles inside. I stepped in and instantly noticed the smell, roses and something else. Something metallic. Ethan locked the door behind us. Dinner was already set up. A beautifully arranged table, 2 wine glasses, and a plate of steak, already cut up for me. You didn't have to do all this, I said, sitting down, his smile stretched a little too wide. For you? Anything. I took a bite. The meat was strange, too soft, too rich. Ethan watched me, his eyes locked onto mine. Do you like it? I nodded slowly, but my stomach twisted. Halfway through dinner, I glanced around the dimly lit cabin. That's when I saw it. A locked door at the end of the hall. Bathroom? I asked, pointing. Ethan's face darkened. Number that room's private. Another red flag. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I wandered around the living room. That's when I saw it. A leather-bound journal on the coffee table. Curious, I flipped it open. Inside were Polaroids, dozens of them. Each picture was of a different woman, all smiling. Some were eating dinner, some were sleeping. My chest tightened. The last page was blank, except for my name, written in perfect, neat handwriting. A chill crawled down my spine. I flipped back through the pages, my hands shaking. The women all had one thing in common. They were here, in this very cabin. I slammed the journal shut. That's when I noticed something else. A wooden box of jewelry tucked beside the fireplace. I knelt down and lifted the lid. Inside were necklaces, earrings, rings, all different styles, all different sizes. Some were tangled, some still had dried blood on them. I wasn't the first. A sickening thought crept into my mind. I looked at the half-eaten steak on my plate, then back at the Polaroids. I ran to the kitchen, throwing open the fridge. My heart nearly stopped. Inside were neatly wrapped packages of raw meat, dozens of them, labeled with names, women's names. The steak in my stomach twisted violently. I barely made it to the sink before I vomited. The shower turned off. I ran to the locked door, trying the handle. It was still locked, but I could hear something. A faint dripping sound. My breath hitched. Then a whisper. Help me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping. My mind was racing. I had to get out. I had to... You went through my things. I turned. Ethan stood in the hallway, towel around his waist, water dripping from his hair. His eyes were different now. Dark, empty. I tightened my grip on the candle holder. His expression softened. I was going to wait until morning, but I guess now works. He took a slow step forward. I swung. The candle holder connected with his head, and he dropped like a stone. Blood pooled beneath him. I didn't check if he was alive. I didn't care. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and sprinted to my car. It wouldn't start. Footsteps behind me. I turned, and Ethan stood in the doorway, head tilted, blood dripping down his forehead. His smile was gone. "You were supposed to stay," he whispered. I screamed, fumbling with my keys, locking the doors. He slammed his fists against the window, cracks forming. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed my phone and pretended to dial 911. That made him stop. His face twisted with rage, but he stepped back. "I'll find you again," he said, voice eerily calm. "They always come back to me." I didn't sleep that night. I waited until morning, until I saw another car pass by. I ran into the road, waving them down. By the time the police arrived, the cabin was empty. No Ethan, no blood, no locked door. But the box of jewelry was still there, and beside it, a new necklace. Mine. Story number 3. My bloody Valentine, literally. Valentine's Day had never been kind to me. Bad dates, heartbreaks, being the third wheel. I'd learned to spend it alone with a bottle of wine and a horror movie. But this year was different. This year I had Logan. We had been dating for 3 months, and he was everything I could have wanted. Attentive, funny, a little intense, but in a way that made me feel special. He was the first guy who ever made me excited for Valentine's Day. He promised a surprise date, something I would never forget. He was right. That night, he picked me up in his truck, blindfolded me playfully, and drove for what felt like forever. I laughed, asking if he was kidnapping me, and he only squeezed my hand. "You trust me, right?" I hesitated, but nodded. When we finally stopped, he led me out carefully. The air was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. "Okay," he whispered, removing the blindfold. "Open your eyes." I did, and my stomach dropped. We were in a graveyard. A freshly dug grave sat right in front of me. The dirt was still loose, the hole deep and waiting. Beside it, a shovel. I turned to Logan, my heart pounding. "What is this?" He smiled. "Your Valentine's gift." I took a shaky step back, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip firm. "I did this for us, a symbol of our love." His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, wild, obsessive. "You always talk about wanting something real, something that lasts forever. What's more forever than this?" He gestured to the grave. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small heart-shaped box, beautifully wrapped in red paper. "I got you something," he said sweetly. I stared at it, hesitant, but he was waiting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a lock of hair, neatly tied with a ribbon. My hair. A wave of nausea hit me. I never gave this to him. How did he... I snapped the box shut and took a step back. "Logan, what the hell is this?" His face darkened. "It's a piece of you. Something to keep forever." I tried to run, but he grabbed me, his fingers digging into my arm. "Don't fight it," he cooed. "I was going to wait until later, but you ruined the surprise." My fingers clawed at the ground, at anything. Then I felt it. A rock. With all the strength I had, I swung it against his head. He let out a strangled grunt, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop. I ran through the endless rows of tombstones, my legs burning. I could hear him stumbling behind me, growling my name. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A headstone, with my name carved into it. Beneath it, today's date. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to keep running. I saw headlights in the distance, a road. Pushing myself harder, I reached the edge of the cemetery just as a car approached. I threw myself into the street, waving frantically. The driver barely stopped in time. A woman rolled down the window, eyes wide with shock. "Are you okay?" Behind me, Logan emerged from the darkness, breathing heavily. His face was streaked with blood, but he was smiling. "She's fine. She's just drunk." The woman looked between us, hesitant. I did the only thing I could. I lunged toward her car door, screaming, "He's trying to kill me." That was enough. She let me in and peeled away, leaving Logan standing in the road, watching us disappear. I called the police. They searched the cemetery, but found nothing. No Logan, no fresh grave, no evidence. He was gone. Weeks passed. I tried to erase him from my life. But then, yesterday, a letter arrived. No return address. No name. Just a single sheet of paper. "You were supposed to be my forever." Taped to the back was a photo of the empty grave. Waiting. That night, I triple-checked my locks, closed my curtains, and tried to sleep. But at 2:47 a.m., something woke me. A faint, crunching noise. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. It was coming from outside. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. My heart nearly stopped. There, in the dim glow of the porch light, were footprints, fresh, muddy footprints. They led from the woods and stopped right at my door. Story number 4, Be Mine, Sarah. Valentine's Day 2010. I hadn't exactly been the most successful when it came to relationships. Sure, I'd had my share of dates, but nothing serious. This year, though, I thought things might be different. I had matched with Sarah on the dating app a few weeks earlier, and there was something about her that drew me in. She was beautiful, funny, and seemed smart. Everything I wanted. We exchanged messages, and by Valentine's Day, we decided to meet up. I had it all planned out. A nice French restaurant downtown, the kind of place that screamed romantic without being over the top. I wanted everything to be perfect. I arrived early, just like I always did, and I waited. My heart was racing in my chest. I couldn't help it. I wanted her to like me. When she walked in, though, I knew I had her. She looked exactly like her photos, and when our eyes met, she smiled. It was perfect. "Sarah," I said, standing up, "it's so good to finally meet you." Her smile was shy, but I could tell she was excited too. As we sat down, I could feel my nerves calming. She was talking about her work, about her family, about how she spent her childhood, and I was hanging on every word. She had the most incredible laugh. The way she talked, the way she moved, everything about her was so captivating. I couldn't stop staring. I had to hold myself back from saying it right then, but I needed her to know. She was the one. When the waiter came to take our orders, I noticed something strange. Sarah was eating her food, but I wasn't hungry anymore. It wasn't about the food. It was about her. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her face. I just had to tell her. "You're beautiful," I said, almost without thinking. "I've never met anyone like you. You're perfect." She looked a little uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop myself. She needed to understand what I was feeling. We were meant to be. She didn't see it yet, but she would. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the cool metal of the ring I had for her. I had to give it to her. I needed her to understand that this night was the beginning of something far more significant than just a date. I pulled out the ring and placed it on the table in front of her. "It's for you," I said softly. "A token. Something to remember this night by." She looked at the ring, clearly confused. "I'm not sure I understand," she said, her voice shaky. I smiled, leaning in slightly. "It's a symbol, a promise, a bond." Her expression shifted to one of hesitation, but I was determined. She needed to know I was serious about this. I took her hand gently, feeling her fingers tremble against mine. You don't need to understand right now, I whispered, keeping my eyes locked onto hers. Just wear it. I promise it's the beginning of something. Forever. She pulled her hand away quickly, standing up. I think it's time for me to go, she said, her voice tense. I froze. She wasn't going to leave me. Not like this. Not after all that I had done for her. I could feel the anger rising in my chest. How dare she walk away from me, after everything I had done to make this night special? You don't want to leave me, I said, my voice low, almost threatening. Not after everything I've done for you. But she didn't listen. She was already walking away, and every step she took sent a spike of rage into my chest. I couldn't let her leave. I followed her. Not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to make sure she didn't get too far. She was mine. I had done everything right, and now she was going to realize that. Outside the restaurant, I watched her head toward her car, still with that cold expression on her face. She didn't even look back at me, like I was nothing, like I was just some guy who didn't matter. My breathing became shallow. My palms were sweating. She was running away from me. She was running away from everything I had given her. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't. I called after her. You're going to regret this, Sarah. You're going to see that I'm the one who understands you. She didn't stop. That's when I snapped. I couldn't let her get away. I had to show her. I followed her all the way back to her apartment building, watching from the shadows, watching her go inside. My heart was pounding. She didn't know what she was doing to me. I didn't want to hurt her. Not at first. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to make her understand. She would understand soon enough. The next day, I went to her apartment door. I was going to leave her the rose, a reminder of what could have been. But it had to be special. She would have to know how serious I was. I found the dead rose, the one I had gotten her on our date. It was perfect. A sign. A warning. I knew what it meant. She would come back to me. She would see that I was serious. I left it on her doorstep and slipped away into the shadows. I had waited long enough. Days went by. The dead rose was gone, but there was no word from her. Nothing. I couldn't let her slip away. She was mine, and I was going to make sure she understood that. Then a message arrived. Forever is just the beginning, Sarah. It was all part of the plan. She would see. She would understand that no one could love her like I did.